So, good morning, good friends and participants. Really happy to see you in Stockholm this morning. Not only because we are now in the World Championship of Football, but of course that it's a part of it. We had a typical Swedish night yesterday. We played 0-0 and we advanced. Swedish model. So welcome to this very important conference, just right in time. This is the debate and discussion everywhere, and this is the first time we have a more in-deep debate amongst the Nordic trade union leaders. So let me first of all say thank you to NFS and THIÉBAUT Stiftung to make this day possible. This is a question where all the organizations in the Nordic countries now are spending more and more time. We have more and more questions how to evolve our economy and what will happen with workforce in this rapid change of time. But also a very big interest in the Nordic model. More and more countries are now looking at the Nordic countries to find solutions for a problem many countries have. Of course, our model is also a social responsible model where we take care of also the poor people. And I'm always, as a trade union leader, proud to say this sentence. In the Nordic countries, we have the highest low salary in the world. That's a fantastic sentence, isn't it? The highest low salary in the world because of people in this room. And of course, that's put the focus on the biggest problem. How to prevent people from going into unemployment in this rapid changing economy. And more, if you want to keep the Nordic model, you must be super flexible. And I think the Nordic model gives high salary, but also super flexibility. We are not afraid of the new machine. We are afraid of the old machine. It's also a very good trade union sentence from the past. Today, actually, also OECD and IMF are praising the Nordic model. They are looking and they are coming in big numbers to the Nordic countries to see on our different models on flex security in the Nordic countries. So I think actually we have something to teach the world. Just yesterday I had 20 French bankers coming to ELO, interested in how we could have the highest low salary in the world and still be super competitive. As you know, all the Nordic countries are top 12 in the world on competitiveness. And I can say this just today because you're in Stockholm. First of all, of course, Sweden on place 7. But then all of you are coming close to that. And all top 12 in the world, that's fantastic. We are super competitive economies and more equal societies in all other places in the world. You know, I have 3 people asking me before coming up here, how long will you speak? So I will do it really fast in the opening. I will come back in the end and say some ideas about the question. And I will just this morning say welcome here, thank NFS and THIÉBAUT Stiftung, and then introduce Jenny Gränsman and Peter Arnfeldt-Schröder, our 2 moderators for the day. And Jenny is from the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers, and Peter is from the Danish ELO. Welcome and take over the day, and I could go down and rest.
So thank you very much to Carl-Peter for staying below the 5 minutes. That's the very important task for us. So I'm Peter, I'm from the Danish LO.
And I'm Jenny from the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers. We want to wish you very welcome once again. Very happy to see you all here. And first I would like to ask Peter, what is your opinion upon digitalization and globalization?
Well, luckily, Jenny asked me this question just like 10 minutes ago, so I had some time to think about it. But I think my take is that a lot of what we're seeing now is not that radically new, not that disruptive, that we need to look back at our history to see, well, why did we actually emerge as trade unions and try to use those insights as the way forward for this. So hopefully we can elaborate on this today. But what about you, Jenny?
Well, I thought when I looked at the program for today that I'm quite happy that we have left this doomsday scenario that we had kind of 2 years ago, where we thought globalization and digitalization would bring kind of a Game of Thrones to the labor market, where everybody would be decapitated and lose their jobs. So I'm really happy to see that we have changed that mindset, and I'm looking forward to today's program. And first, we will want to give you some practical information. You start about the program.
Yeah, so we have 3 parts. Part 1 is called Setting the Scene, and we'll have some very interesting speakers. I won't elaborate on that. We'll introduce each one of them as they come up. Then we will have a part 2 with some breakout sessions about trade union strategies. And each of you will have opted in on what you want to participate in. And one part will take place here in the main room, and another part will take part in the back. But Jenny will tell you about that afterwards. And then we'll have the last part where we have some more speakers and 2 more panels. But most important of all, lunch is at 12. So that's the next time you can get coffee. Unless you're very desperate, I'm sure you can sneak out in the back, but please refrain from doing that. But Jenny, some more practical.
Yes, apart from lunch, I also want to tell you, you have toilets in the hall, and toilets also, if you go up on the balcony and downstairs, you'll find some more toilets, and there is also a silent room if somebody needs desperately to take a phone call or do something else and doesn't want to step out in the cold on the staircase. There's a silent room behind, and to get to the room for breakout session B and D, I think it is, you have to go up on the balcony and then to the rear room behind this stage. And the balcony is also where lunch and coffee will be served during this day. And then to the most important in today's society is that we have 2 hashtags, Nordic unions and digitalization. And you have all this information on the front of your program, actually. But then there is the Wi-Fi that you can see on the pillars. I think the username is event, and then I can't see the rest, but you can read it for yourself. And so, is that all the practical?
I think so, yes. Otherwise, ask us or figure it out by yourself. So perhaps without further ado, we should call up our next speaker, the Deputy Director General in the ILO, Deborah Greenfield. Please give her a hand.
And Deborah has lately been working a lot on ILO's initiative, Future of Work. And I was happy when I checked a bit more. Yesterday I found a blog post you had written this spring, which was entitled more or less, Preparing for the Work We Want. And that's a bit what Peter was telling us about. It's not all new, it's old questions, but we have to see what we can do about it. Right. Please, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carl Petter, and to all of you, my colleagues in the labor movement, for the opportunity to be with you this morning to talk about the future of work and how the ILO is approaching this enormous set of challenges. Let me start where I always start, and that is by saying that the founders of the ILO in 1919 believed that lasting peace could only be achieved through social justice. And so our Constitution gives us a very clear mandate to achieve that goal, to achieve social justice. As we turn 100 in 2019, we find ourselves in the midst of a technological revolution. And here I would say the pace of change and the depth of change is probably a bit different than we've seen before. That revolution is changing the way we live, which means it's changing the way we work, the way we connect with each other. And so the ILO has launched a Future of Work initiative to understand the challenges and the opportunities that we face, and to play a leading role in advancing our mandate for social justice as we move forward in this new environment. Today I want to start by talking about some of the challenges and opportunities that we see emerging from this rapid technological changing environment that we live in, and then let you know a little bit more about how the ILO is preparing itself to deal with these changes. And finally, to perhaps highlight what I think are some of the key areas where the Nordic region is providing leadership in these key issues. And I've promised our moderators that I will try to leave time for questions. In the United States, we actually hold up a red card when a speaker goes over the time limit. I know we don't do that here, but perhaps someone will tell me when I'm close to that limit. And that's all I'm going to tell you about football today. My key message, and if you hear nothing else today, please hear this, is that not only can we, but we must direct the future of work through well-designed policies that are strongly informed by social dialogue. That's difficult to do, but that is our challenge and that is our charge. Along the way this morning, I want to ask some questions that I will say I don't have many answers to, but I think they all need to be dealt with on a somewhat urgent basis. The innovations that we're seeing today, for example, big data, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and robotics, just to name a few, have really contributed to a transformation in the nature of work. How this advances or challenges the attainment of social justice is an open question. And so we need to pay attention to whether this technological transformation will inhibit or generate decent work, and what our role is in making sure that it generates decent work. Since the introduction of the microprocessor, all the way back in the beginning of the 1970s, the process of digitalization has transformed the way in which we organize production and the way in which we deliver services. The increase in connectivity, the internet in general, and the Internet of Things in particular right now, brings new opportunities. But it's also created new forms of digital labor, engaging individuals in the gig economy or through crowdsourcing platforms in what we might call bites of work, perhaps as microtaskers or as virtual assistants. There's often no dedicated location for this work. And I think even more important, there's often no obvious, and I say obvious, employer. I think there often is an employer, but no obvious employer or employment relationship that might ensure a minimum degree of labor protection, the kinds of labor protections that the Nordic model has really pioneered and shown is not only possible, but is essential for growth and development. At times, this work may be unpaid, although the commercial benefits are enormous. And it means, and the means for society to value this work don't quite exist yet. New technologies also blur the lines between work, between one's public life, and home, one's private life, because they ensure that we are on call and online all the time, extending our working hours, but not necessarily remunerating them. So let me turn to the impact on employment. Now, studies vary widely on how many jobs will be created, what the net job destruction will be. For example, studies on robotization show that the risk of job loss is high for routine and manual labor, including potentially in some service industries, but not for other types of jobs. Some studies predict that more than half of all current jobs will either change significantly or disappear entirely. It may not make sense to dwell exclusively or too much on getting the numbers right. I think instead we need to keep a number of variables in mind, a number of scenarios, all of which make the effects of the new automation technologies on the number of jobs an open question, although an urgent question. First, we need to make a distinction between what can be automated and what will be automated. These are two fundamentally different things, and they remind us that the introduction of new technologies is not purely a technological question. It's also an economic question and, I would say, a social one as well. So let's take countries with low labor costs. Here, in labor-intensive industries, where the competitive edge is low labor costs, the probability that a job will be automated in those countries is low. It doesn't make economic sense. Depending on the product, the probability that low-cost, labor-intensive production will, on the other hand, be reshored is greater than the probability that it will be automated where it's performed now. This is because the automation of production will most likely be concentrated in developed countries, like yours. So offshoring has consequences for developing countries because they lose their competitive edge. And it has consequences for developed countries because when those jobs are automated, what jobs are moving back to your shores? Not the high-skilled jobs, but the low-skilled jobs. And this brings me to a much larger point, which is that inequality is the defining issue of our time on a global scale. And how we promote the use of technology to either narrow the gap, the wage gap, the income gap, within countries and between countries, or whether we allow it to continue to polarize the inequality divide is really a matter of policy, and one that I think the trade unions have to keep uppermost as you decide what your orientation to technology is all about. Second, any job contains a variety of tasks, some of which are highly automatable, some of which are not. So some studies suggest that rather than thinking about entire jobs being destroyed or disappearing, we need to think more about tasks. And these studies show that about 50% of tasks will be automated. What this means is that around 50% of working time will be truncated. So the type of disruption we're talking about is of the amount of work and working hours that are potentially automatable. Depending on the system of industrial relations and broader social factors, the remaining work can be shared among workers, which could reduce working time, or it could lead to task consolidation and, in turn, job destruction. And reducing working time has a direct effect and relationship with social protection coverage. This is another area where I think the Nordic model is going to be tested. Third, some studies, and those that focus on the use of industrial robotics, emphasize the importance of robotics on productivity and wages, which result in job creation. So if you think about the advent of automatic teller machines, which are all over, they're ubiquitous, one would think that this fourfold increase in ATMs in the last decade or so would mean a net decrease in the number of human beings who are tellers and banking staff. But that's not the case. While the number of tellers per bank branch declined, the total number of bank tellers increased by 10%. Why? Because the remaining tellers upgraded to provide services on loans, on credit cards, and so-called relationship banking. They had higher skills, and so they have higher wages than their traditional counterparts. This, of course, boosted aggregate demand, created additional jobs in the wider economy, and had a win-win effect. But regardless of the exact number of jobs at risk, one message is clear, and you hear it all the time, and that is, in the absence of adequate opportunities to acquire new relevant skills, many of those whose jobs are at risk of loss or contraction may be forced to take lower skilled, lower paying jobs. This, of course, puts further downward pressure on wages in the low wage sector. And in that context, the question arises about whether welfare systems like those in the Nordic model will be able to cope with the additional pressure from displaced labor. Can this model survive? If so, how will it be funded? Does the political will exist to continue that model? And how do you as trade unions position yourselves in that debate? And when we talk about skills, the new phrase that gets bandied about all the time is lifelong learning. I think it's time that we actually defined that term, put some meat on the bone, so to speak. It's not just a slogan. And we talked about the relationship between basic education and vocational education, between the education that everyone is entitled to growing up, to prepare oneself not just for a job, but to be a citizen of the world, and the kind of skilling and reskilling that allows people to have productive employment in decent working conditions. And whose responsibility is it to provide that? Now, whether and how we share the dividends of technology from the current and the future waves of innovation is also, as I said, a critical issue. The digital economy currently generates substantial gains in productivity and profits from larger global markets. But these dividends generated in the digital sectors have so far not spilled over to the rest of the economy, and they often remain in developed countries. Now, that's good news for you and your members, but on a global level, that is not good news. And it's worth noting the difference, for example, in access to technology, both within and across countries. I recently heard someone say that 50% of the world's population is not connected. Most of these people are in emerging and developing economies. And so the danger is that the technological revolution, shall we call it, Work 4.0, will bypass the developing and emerging world. And the pressure this will put on young people, where there is a youth bulge in those countries, to migrate because they have to in order to work, will be tremendous. And I don't think this is the kind of world that we're all trying to create. And so we have to pay close attention to the gaps in equality, to the distributional effects of technology as we move forward into the future of work. So mindful of these and other issues, the ILO launched its Future of Work Centenary Initiative in 2013, and I'll just say that I think this was a bit prescient on the part of the Director General, because 4 years ago we were just beginning to hear about the future of work. But we did so in order to understand and to grab a hold of the issues that are challenging us in the world of work. We clustered our first stage of the Future of Work initiative into what we call 4 conversations. The first one is really it's called Work and Society. And it's all about what work means for the individual and the community as we move forward into the future of work. Does it mean the same thing for personal development? Should it? We think it should. But what are the challenges in making sure that work not only fulfills material needs, but individual needs and builds community? The second centenary conversation we call Decent Jobs for All. and it provides insight into the sources of new jobs to achieve full employment under decent work conditions. The third centenary conversation is the organization of work and production. And here we addressed the implications of the changing organization of work and production on working conditions, on work intensity, on worker well-being, and on work-life balance. The fourth and last centenary conversation, and the one that I often refer to as the punchline, is the governance of work. And here, we're looking at the question of whether our existing institutions, labor market institutions, institutions for representativity of workers and employers, for example, are fit for purpose to address the challenges of the future. In the first phase of our Future of Work initiative, we asked our member states to conduct national dialogues on the future of work. And while we didn't specify how they should conduct them or what they should talk about, most of them were done on a tripartite basis, governments, workers, and employers, and most of them followed the four conversations. And what's so interesting about the breadth of these discussions is that they occurred in developed economies, but they occurred in fragile and conflict-ridden states, in some of the least developed countries of the world. The outcome of these dialogues is now online in a synthesis report, and this was made available to our Future of Work Global Commission, which is the second phase of our initiative. The Global Commission was launched by the Director General in August of this year, and it brings together some 27 experts from around the world, from all sectors, and it's co-chaired by President Amina Gharib Fakim from the Republic of Mauritius and Prime Minister Stefan Löfven from Sweden. And Mr. Thorben Albrecht, who will be on one of the panels today, is, fortunately for us, a member of the Global Commission. The Commission is going to tackle the fundamental questions as they define it about how a rapidly transforming world of work should be organized. What are the policy recommendations that the ILO should put forward to the global community? In 2019, the experts will produce an independent report that will be submitted to the Centenary Labor Conference. And that brings me to the third phase of our initiative. When we turn 100 in 2019, our International Labor Conference, our annual event in June of every year, will be dedicated to the future of work. And we anticipate that our delegates will consider the Global Commission's report and issue further guidance to the ILO about what our global agenda should be as we move forward through these challenges in the future of work. Let me end by saying a few words on how this region is providing critical leadership on issues related to the future of work. First, you lead initiatives and partnerships like the Global Deal that put social dialogue at the heart of efforts to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular on decent work and inclusive growth. And your insistence on social dialogue is, in fact, a paradigm for the rest of the world. Second, you exercise leadership through the way in which you face your own challenges as social partners. Social dialogue is in your DNA, as it is in the ILO's, whether shaping skills policies and programs for lifelong learning, or, as in Denmark, through the establishment of a disruption council to ensure that all Danes are well equipped for the future. Third, you exercise leadership through your own innovations. The ILO was fortunate to participate in the Nordic Conference on the Platform Economy in February, which discussed organizing platform workers in the sharing economy. And we'll hear later today about trade union strategies to regulate platform work and organize and bargain on behalf of workers in the gig economy. But I want to say another word about social dialogue that has increasingly concerned me as I talk to our social partners at the ILO. Employers, certainly those at the ILO, and those whom I read about are overwhelmingly positive about the future of work. They see its potential to increase productivity, to spur innovation, to generate profits, and other huge dividends. So their narrative is one of progress and optimism. They're seizing this moment. And if I may say, I'm not sure that trade unions as a whole have a narrative that embraces the opportunities of the future of work with constructive solutions for its challenges. That's a very difficult project. The challenges have to do with the nature of the work that's done, the nature of the employment relationship that this work is creating, and the labor market institutions that need to be retooled to deal with distributional issues. But I would suggest that the most creative, innovative, positive contributions that the trade union movement globally, and I would say the Nordic trade union movement in your leadership role, can make is to understand that there are opportunities here if they are managed through well-developed policies. And that's connected, of course, to how well unions build their representativity, how you deal with organizing in an atomized and very disconnected world. Difficult challenges indeed. So, as I said at the beginning, the future of work is the future we make and shape through our policies. And I'm looking forward to the discussions today to give me inspiration. Thank you very much. Sure.
So, thank you very much, Deborah. That was very inspiring. So, if there's anyone out there who just have like one very concise question, you are welcome now. I, for one, thought that it was nice that, first of all, you mentioned the Copenhagen Platform Conference. We all remember that, right? No, that was wonderful. But I was very fond that you mentioned organizing as well in the end, because that is, I guess, the whole reason why we're all here. So if you have one short advice for how do we increase and better our organizing in the Nordics before you leave us, is there a very short advice for that?
Well, you know more about organizing in the Nordic countries than I do, but I would say that it's very important not to assume that people don't have employers. They may be performing their work in slightly different ways, but I think the notion that everybody is an entrepreneur is not the case. And so you might have to organize in different locations and through different means. But I think we need to be very careful before we say that people are all self-employed. And even if they are workers who need a voice.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Give her a hand. And just a quick notice, instead of giving all our wonderful speakers some kind of nice little gift that will remind them of Stockholm or whatever, we're giving a collective gift in the spirit of this gathering from union to union. So and Carl Petter will say some more about it in the end. So it's not because we're cheap that Deborah doesn't get some nice flowers or something like that now. But so please welcome our next speaker, Confederal Secretary in the ETUC, THIÉBAUT. Give him a hand.
Thank you. So, I have to.
THIÉBAUT is telling me that he will be very strict with the time, so I'm very happy.
I will try. I'm French.
Oh,
I will
yeah.
try. Okay?
I will try to look, you know,
Everything is possible.
a bit angry if you go too much over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm THIÉBAUT Weber. I'm Confederal Secretary in the European Trade Union Confederation. That I guess you all know. All the Nordic unions are important members of our European Trade Union Confederation that represent 80 national confederations in 36 countries in Europe and also 10 European sectoral federations. I have prepared this presentation. I try my best to make it attractive, but I'm afraid it is still 1.0 or 2.0 at maximum, so I will try my best. So the digital economy is a new challenge for Europe as a whole. Usually I use this guy to talk and represent a bit the challenges linked to digitalization. Do you know these guys? Yeah? Janus, the Roman god Janus. Sorry, I should have chosen a Nordic god, but I don't know if you have the equivalent. Yeah, you have one? Vikings, okay. So this one was the god of the crossings and the corridors, of the future and the past, and also of changes and transition. So to me, it represents all the challenges linked to digitalization, the risks, but also the opportunities linked to digitalization and the fourth industrial revolution. So what are the opportunities presented so far? First of all, possible job creation in subsectors, gains in terms of productivity, which are not only important for employers, but we all know that productivity is also important for wages. So there are possible gains in terms of productivity, energy and raw material savings, through digitalization, of course, to have a smarter use of energy, but also to better use raw materials, for example, through 3D printing, and better assess also the whole process of a product until the recycling through RFID chips, for example, or technology. Possible less arduous work. We all know that in the industries, for example, robots or some kind of automatization led also to less arduous work, taking over some tasks that were delivered first by humans, workers. So we have robots and also cobots. Cobots who are not here to replace workers, but to support them in delivering some tasks, carrying heavy loads, for example, heavy materials. So there is a diverse range of robots that could assist or work with workers. We have also in the services possible more horizontal cooperation through digital tools. Now, what are the risks that are usually presented? Possible job destruction. So it's very difficult to use one figure or one number to say that this will be the amount of jobs that will be destroyed. From 100%, for example, Mohammad Yunus, the famous Nobel Peace Prize for having created microcredit and microfinance, said last week that all the jobs will be destroyed, that we should all go for entrepreneurship, whether it is social entrepreneurship, but that all classical forms of employment will be destroyed. And if we look at more, let's say, more serious experts, we go more and more to figures like 10% of the jobs that are at risk of being replaced by automatized process, and half of the jobs that will be changed, or where some tasks could be changed. So it doesn't mean necessarily that all the jobs will be destroyed, but that they will be for sure influence or change in the tasks they are delivering. So again, we see that it's a complex topic on the way it impacts not only jobs, but the content of it, the different tasks and the professions as well. A possible segmentation of the labor market, this was already mentioned by Deborah, in particular with the platform economy, and this important macroeconomic topic that is the risks of having more monopolies, so one seller or one gateway for markets, or monopolists with this one buyer for the products. So will this trend of winners takes all win, or are we able to limit that or to break this trend? And the last thing is more control with digital data. So of course, with digital data, we have open sources, we have big data, we can better know and definitely use also it as an opportunity, but we should also define the relevant limit to make sure that privacy is still guaranteed by our rules. So the thing is that the fourth industrial revolution for us won't be fair by nature, but is it the first time? Is it something new? I mean, have a look at the past. First industrial revolution. Was it fair by nature? Of course not. And I mean, here in particular, in the Nordic country, you all know that thanks to the trade union movement in particular, we shaped a fairer, let's say, industrial revolution, and this is what led to the Nordic model, but also to the economic and social European model with a strong social protection systems, collective bargaining, social legislation. Also, it led to the creation of ILO. So it wasn't fair by nature. We organized, we created trade unions, and we found a way to make it fairer, let's say. So our message, our first message is that we can still influence the process and possibly share a fairer digital economy. And why? First of all, because we need to have a look to the technology itself, to digitalization and automatization, to have a cool head and to not be too much influenced by narrative that says that it will be a big wave that will come overnight and that will destroy everything and that we can resist to it. Look at this picture. This is a very famous picture. At least one guy on the picture is very, very famous. This was used in 2012 by Andrej Karpathy, who is now the artificial intelligence chief in Tesla. He used it in 2012 to explain all the challenges for artificial intelligence. He said, okay, nice. A computer now is able to see men on the picture, possibly to see that they are in a room, that they are wearing suits. Okay, but are they able to make the difference between the people in the mirror and the real people? Are they able to see that someone is on a scale? Because if you look at the scale, you barely see it, or for a computer it will be difficult to see the machine. Will the computer be able, in a 2D dimension, not in a 3D one, to see that Barack Obama has its foot on the scale and not on the ground? And above all, will it be able to interpret humor? Why this picture is funny? It is funny because of this scene, and it is funny because it's Barack Obama. It can be funny with a normal guy, but because it is Barack Obama, it is more funny. And in 2012, he explained that, wow, we are far and far away for the artificial intelligence to replace someone to interpret this picture and to find it funny. Now, 5 years later, in September 2017, the artificial intelligence chief in Google, Mr. Gianna Andrea, I think, said so in last September that still artificial intelligence is not able to read. I mean, to read, not to take the information, but to reason about a document. Again, a French field medal, Cédric Villani, said the same recently. He's a specialist on algorithm, and he said that he's even pessimistic and he doesn't believe so much on the fact that algorithm will be able to reason so much on documents. So I'm not saying it won't be possible, but that this wave has limit at its own limit before it will replace us. So why we can still influence? As I said, technology is not ready to replace us. It won't change overnight. It will change, definitely, but it won't change, I mean, from 2017 to 2018. So we can still have an influence on it. Also, this is not because technology exists, that it is necessarily widely deployed. It depends a lot on the economic and social context. So if you are in a company or in a country which has huge investment capacity, public investment in infrastructure, for example, broadband, of course, digitalized public services or so on, or in a company that is able to heavily invest in automatized process, that's fine. But if you are not, it changes the way digitalization and robotization can impact your country. It depends also on the fact that old problems remain. I mean, we have still a lot of our problems to deal with growth, inequalities, and of course climate change, which has, again, a link with digitalization. Is our electrical system able to cope with millions of people will plug their electric car every evening at home, plus the digitalized and fully automatized process, without necessarily creating more and more energy and using, I don't know, more carbon? This is a huge question. Is our energy system and is our planet able to cope with a fully automatized society? That's another limit we should discuss on. Of course, I'm not saying that this won't happen and that is just a fantasy. I'm just saying that we can have a say and we can have an influence on it. First of all, unions and social partners. As unions, we have a strong responsibility because we are the only one that can give solutions and provide for solutions for workers. Who else could do it? I mean, we are the only one that are now existing to... It's not mine. Yeah, I take all the energy from the computer. So we are the only one that are able to represent them and to make sure that we provide the relevant solution for the future of their job. First step is, of course, to organize them and to empower them in the way that they have a say on the way digitalization affects their job. We have also a huge responsibility in finding solutions through social dialogue and strong collective bargaining systems. And we, as mentioned by Deborah, a huge challenge is the share of the value created with digitalization. And we know that the best way here, in particular in your countries, to share values is through strong collective bargaining systems. And we have the same opinion at European level, and we propose the employer to open discussions on the challenges linked to digitalization and automatization, as it is also a transnational or European challenges. Now, the ball is in their courts. Unfortunately, the European employers, the European organization are not so much keen to discuss on that. That's a bit pity, but we are strongly pushing them to open discussions on these challenges. It's a new challenge for Europe to deal with the social dimension of the digital single market, and in particular to fight against the possible digital divide between countries, but also inside countries, between territories, to make sure that there is a level playing field in Europe and to ensure that digitalization will not be the ground for further divergences between countries. An up-to-date regulatory framework on platforms, on artificial intelligence, who is liable, on robotics, and on taxation, and to make sure that digital value is taxed where it is created and not only where the profits are registered. I will go into the other points because the time is running. Of course, support workers on technological change and the need for strong EU investment on research and development, innovation, and education and training. What is our roadmap, our trade union roadmap at a European level? Of course, linked to the future of work, we need a strong European pillar of social rights. We will discuss that this afternoon, so I will keep it for this afternoon. We will work on the European Commission's initiative on online platform. This is not a social initiative, but this is a business-to-platform initiative, so under commercial and business law. But we will see how it is possible to deal with problems faced by self-employed, whether they are genuine or bogus, it's another question, but we will try to see how to influence this process. We'll try to establish a dialogue with the platform representatives in January in an event called Sharers and Workers Europe, and you are strongly invited to participate to this event. We will launch a dedicated work with MEPs in the European Parliament and with the European Economic and Social Committee on artificial intelligence and robotics to work on the possible relevant rules and regulations that should be implemented on these topics. And we will, of course, work on the possible changes in the investment funds at the European level to make sure that it cope with the challenges linked to better supporting sectors and workers affected by automatization and digitalization, not only to repair, but also to anticipate and better support these sectors. In brief, 3 words. The first one is human in command approach. We are convinced that we can influence this process. Human in command approach was mentioned by the European Economic and Social Committee in a recent report on artificial intelligence. This means that we should put this principle forward to say that, hey, come on, even on artificial intelligence, at the end, humans have a say and have a control and a liability on what happened. The second is, this is a possible new start for social dialogue and also a possible new start for trade unions. Why not thinking about new innovative practices in terms of organizing and trade union activities? And the third one is, there is a possible way, a European way to shape the 4th industrial revolution with our strong social protection system, collective bargaining. Our model is still valuable in the 4th industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thibaut. Very interesting. Do we have some very short and concise questions to Thibaut? No? You will have them this, yeah, 6? Do you want a mic?
I've heard a lot about competitiveness in these conferences, and you and I have been at a lot of these conferences on digitalization. And one of the questions that I keep hearing is, how is Europe going to stay competitive? How are the Nordics going to stay competitive? How is Germany going to stay competitive? How is Sweden going to stay competitive? But one of the themes that I hear in your talk and that I heard in Deborah's talk is that we need to be concerned about inequality. So those of us in rich countries need to be concerned about how people in other countries are doing. And my question in this context is competitiveness a toxic ideology? Do we need to think about something other than competitiveness?
That's a very good question. I have 30 seconds, so it's clear that the usual narrative on digitalization, and so far the main narrative from the Commission, the European Commission, on digitalization is the job opportunities and competitiveness. And it's clear that, I mean, the economic opportunities are important, but now we should look at 2 ways to tackle inequalities. First of all is taxation, and in particular for the big digital companies that so far are only taxed on profits made in countries with low tax rates. So we should better tax digital wealth digital value, which is the black gold of the fourth industrial revolution. We should tax it where it is created, everywhere in Europe. And of course, for us, through collective bargaining. So maybe reinvent, maybe adapt, maybe being innovative in our collective bargaining systems, but make sure that it share the value and the wealth among the people.
Thank you very much, THIÉBAUT.
Thank you.
Listen, I
2
think,
minutes more.
does this work? It does, okay. Then I would like to welcome Mr. DAGFINN HØYBRÅTEN. Please, Mr. HØYBRÅTEN. And Mr. HØYBRÅTEN is Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers, but he has held virtually every position possible in Norwegian politics, as a minister, as an MP. He's even had his own party, I've been told. You've been leader of the Christian Democrats.
Yeah, I didn't own the party, but
No,
I was
but
chairman.
Okay, so and you are going to speak about the Nordic-Baltic region as a front runner for digital technology and development. Please,
I
Mr.
will.
HØYBRÅTEN.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to NFS for inviting me to this conference. I always like discussing and meeting with the NFS. The three-party model is an integral part of the Nordic model, which we strongly believe in. I'm also delighted to have been able to listen to DEBORAH GREENFIELD and THIÉBAUT Weber and hear the future of work, life, and digital agenda perspectives presented from the ILO and ETUC, respectively. The Nordic, or rather the Nordic-Baltic region, is well positioned to show the way for digitalization of Europe. The digital maturity of our society is generally high. Our governments have high ambitions for digitalization services to citizens and businesses, and the level of digital competences among the people is generally high. The assessments done by World Economic Forum and other organizations show that the Nordics are ahead, but in a way we are lagging ahead. The speed at which we develop is maybe a slower pace than other countries, which means that we should really have a focus on how we utilize the opportunities and meet the challenges together. We still have a great potential for seizing the benefits of digitalization in order to improve quality of life for our citizens and to make our enterprises, public or private, more innovative and competitive. At the Nordic-Baltic Ministerial Conference, Digital North, that was held in Oslo this April, the ministers signed an ambitious declaration outlining visionary goals for stronger regional cooperation on common digital challenges and opportunities. As a follow-up of this, and in order to capitalize on our knowledge and relatively strong position in the digital area, the Nordic Council of Ministers recently established a Nordic Ministerial Council for Digitalization, involving the Baltic countries as close partners. The ministers will meet for the first meeting in this new Ministerial Council in Oslo on the 8th of December. One important aim of this cooperation is to capture the technological development in a manner that maintains levels of protection for workers, employment conditions, and exchange solutions to challenges arising from the sharing economy and other more or less disruptive business models. Let me say a few words about the impact of digitalization on the Nordic model. As most of you are probably aware of, there is a core of common values, standards, and types of employment which together define the nature of work life and labor market policies in the Nordic countries. We can speak of a Nordic model also in this respect. It's often mentioned that digital technologies will bring threats and opportunities alike to this model, and it was touched upon by the two previous speakers. Questions are raised on how the Nordic model will be affected by trends in digitalization, globalization, and new labor structures. These questions are on the agenda in all the Nordic countries, all the Nordic governments, and therefore naturally also on the agenda in the Nordic cooperation. These are political topics where joint efforts in the Nordic cooperation will be able to add more value than the countries will be able to do on their own. But how does digitalization affect the professional life of the Nordic people? When I started my public service back in the early 90s in municipal Norway, internet was something we just had heard of as a distant phenomenon. A decade or so later, when I was Norway's Minister of Labor, emails started to become an integral part of my daily work life. When emails were invented in the 1990s, for a time it was a limited innovation for the interested few. And by the middle of the next decade, emails were used by everyone as a tool. So today most people can't live without them, or they might have dreams of how they could live without them, but they don't manage to do. I mean, this is not so a distant past. It's actually, at least for some of us here in this audience, something that was quite a reality just a few years ago. So since the development has been extremely rapid, no one could foresee at the end of the last century how digitalization would impact work life in 2017. Today we're trying to cope with how to use the latest in technology, big data, robotization, and to make businesses effective, at the same time make a healthy and secure work life for the employees. The rise of sharing economy in the recent years have been given much attention. The sharing economy is founded on new digital technology and has some new implications for the labor market. We can look at the sharing economy as a trend which will create more jobs and give workers more flexibility and control over when and where they work, or we can look at it as a threat to traditional employer-employee relations, which may lead to more inequality and poor work conditions. To predict the future is impossible and probably also very unwise, but we have reasons to believe that digital development for the next 10 years will be at least as rapid as in the last 10 years, probably more rapid. And still, it is possible to identify recent drivers and trends in the Nordic and worldwide work life. Digitalization is one concrete example of the drivers and trends. Another example, which will surely make an impact on future work, is migration of people seeking employment. In 2014, the Nordic Council of Ministers for Labor commissioned a former commissioner, Danish minister and former EU Commissioner Poul Nielsen, with the task to conduct a strategic analysis of the Nordic cooperation in work life in the future. Poul Nielsen delivered his report to us last year, and his report lays strong emphasis on the potential for a joint Nordic effort to adapt to the demands we face from what he calls the fragmentation of work life. In 2016, the Nordic Council of Ministers of Labor launched a pilot project on sharing economy, and the report from this project gave a review on how the Nordic countries and their social partners approached the topic of sharing economy at the time when there was little research available in this field. These recent reports show that there is great potential for joint Nordic efforts on how to approach the future of work. That is why we are delighted now to launch a bigger and broader research project which will aim to identify key trends in the Nordic labor market, analyzing the opportunities and the challenges they bring. This project, which is called Future Work, is aimed at generating new knowledge and specific recommendations for Nordic politicians, official agencies, unions, and employers. This kind of knowledge will enable the Nordic countries to work with the foundation of the Nordic model and adapt that to technological change. It's just been announced recently that this quite extensive research project on the future of work in the Nordics will be conducted by FAFO, the Institute for Labour and Social Research in Norway. And I'm happy that FAFO is here today and will present to the conference the concrete plans for the project that they have been commissioned with. It is important to the Nordic Council of Ministers for Labour that this broad project will emphasize the three pillars of the Nordic cooperation in working life. That is the labor market relations, occupational health, and labor law and regulations. The project seeks to identify the main drivers for change and will reshape working life in the coming 15 to 20 years. Especially, the project will focus on the consequences of these drivers for work life and the Nordic model as such. It's also expected that the project will contribute with concrete policy recommendations, both to the countries and to the common cooperation. In the Nordic cooperation, we believe that the next few years it will make it possible to gain a lot of new knowledge about the future of work and how we can work on a Nordic level to meet the digital development and create Nordic digital solutions, and through that also contribute into a wider European and global context, as we have heard of earlier today. We often speak about digitalization and technological development as if they are natural phenomena evolving independently of human interference. And I think a red thread through this morning's interventions have been that that is not true. It is possible to interfere, it's possible to shape, it's possible to be initiating and influencing the process. Digitalization is the result of intended and innovative processes. Despite the fact that the development is massive, we do have a possibility to act. We can secure that digitalization support intelligent solutions to welfare challenges, climate change, and the future of work. And the future of the Nordic model will depend on such active choices. So, at this point, the Nordic cooperation is focused on establishing a knowledge base for the choices needed to be made. I think we stand ready to defend and protect the Nordic model and its core values, because it is value-driven and value-based. But we also stand ready to develop and reform so that it is shipshape to meet the future and its challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dag. Does anyone have a short question? Yes, please.
Yes, I strongly believe that it is a main driver and it will continue to be an important driver. But other drivers will add on to that, and I think if we can make our public sector as efficient and as integrated across the different countries in the Nordic-Baltic region, we will also make the basis for digitalization in the private sector better. And I also think that we will, through that, will create more mobility for businesses as well as for individuals. And I hope that through the work I have presented, that we will contribute on a Nordic level also to lay the foundation for such a development.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.